Almost 2 weeks ago, we had a Russian MP in our parliament speaker's armchair. My question will be short. The first one, why do you think it happened?
Yeah, I think it happened. I hope it was a mistake. I can't imagine how any Georgian politician would accept a move like that and not expect there to be the sort of outburst in response as there was. I mean, to sit in the Speaker of Parliament's chair is just unfathomable to me, having lived through all that we lived through together in 2008 and still today with Russia occupying and creepingly still annexing more and more South Ossetian territories. So I don't know why it happened. I'm not involved in Georgian politics every day like I used to be, but I find it to be at best, utterly reckless and a decision that was ignorant of society's feelings, because it's no surprise that people reacted as they did.
Well, you said it was a mistake, but it was not me, for instance, inviting him. That was an official event.
Yeah.
So kind of a logical moment, a stage in Georgia-Russia relations, maybe. Of the recent years. I'm not sure how close you follow these processes, I mean Georgia-Russia relations during the last several years. How far could it go, and how far Georgia could afford developing these relations while being occupied by Russia?
Well, geography affords Georgia little choice but to have a workable relationship with Russia, right? That it has no choice, it's a major trading partner should be Russia, but the EU should really be the biggest trading partner of Georgia, and that's what's beginning to evolve. I think there are, this incident and the public response shows the natural limits to how far any leader can pull Georgia back toward Russia. Public support for NATO membership is still so high, above 80%, right? That's not going to go down anytime soon based on my own familiarity with Georgian people and Georgian culture. Even President Zurabishvili, many people wonder, oh gee, is she too soft on Russia? But she has been totally consistent on Georgia's destiny being in the transatlantic community. She, I think, wisely doesn't talk about membership so much, but about being as close as possible. And I think what she's trying to do is to find a way to avoid unnecessary, even more difficulty with Moscow, while Georgia breathes as much Western oxygen as it can and solidifies its space in the West. So getting back to your question, how could this have happened? Why would any official Georgian group do this? Again, I think it was a reckless miscalculation and somebody maybe trying to ingratiate themselves with Moscow, perhaps doing someone's bidding in Russia who wanted there to be some kind of a provocation. But I don't have any factual information to prove that.
You mentioned about NATO integration. Bucharest summit is still in, Bucharest summit decisions is still in force. Georgia will become a NATO member one day. Is it enough to repeat that for years and years? I mean, enough for the society which supports NATO membership these many years?
No, I think it's nowhere.
Despite no important, significant development on that way.
No, I don't think it's anywhere near enough. I think the Bucharest decision was tragic and short-sighted by the NATO alliance, the leadership. I know for a fact President Bush was pushing very hard that fateful night during that dinner on whatever it was, April 8th. And I know that Chancellor Merkel resisted and wouldn't allow there to be a consensus on giving a map to Georgia. And that's the great shortcoming of NATO, is that decisions are by consensus. It's also a great strength of it. In that case, consensus decision-making worked against strategic interests of NATO and I think of the United States. So that's a terrible outcome, because it said to President Putin, you will lose Georgia and Ukraine unless you act now, and you still have time, because there's not even a membership action plan given to Georgia. So I've always advocated Georgia should be given a membership action plan right now. I mean, ever since it fulfilled the criteria.
Do you feel that anybody or many care about correction of that mistake of 2008 summit?
I don't. I mean, you mean in the United States or the rest of NATO, yeah?
Yeah.
I think people probably still think it was the proper decision because Georgia lost the battle of the narrative. And so to me, the wrong narrative is the one that prevails, as was evident in the EU report that was drafted afterwards, saying that Georgia started the war by taking the first shot. It's impossible to say who started the war. There were very provocative actions taken on both sides. Georgia was defending its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, and Russia was provoking. In my experience, there was shooting going on a long time before 2008 August, even years before. There were assassinations. The Russians, as we all know, shot down the Georgian drone. They were doing all sorts of other provocative military things. So, but the truthful narrative is not the one that has prevailed. And so I think decision makers now in the rest of NATO, or in NATO, think, oh, thank goodness we didn't give Georgia a membership action plan because we would have been at war with Russia. When the truth is, had Georgia been given a membership action plan, I think Russia never would have invaded because it would have been ambiguous whether or not NATO would reply.
What should happen now?
Georgia should be given a membership action plan, and Russia's in a corner, which could be dangerous, but Russia is, it's bogged down in Syria. Its economy is in big trouble. The sanctions are biting, and I think Georgia should get the membership action plan now, and the NATO alliance should be strong and say, sorry, but you invaded Ukraine, you annexed Crimea, you invaded Georgia, you occupy South Ossetia and Abkhazia. We learned our lesson. We're going to make clear to you, no more.
You know, the Russian government started raised this issue of the security of Russian citizens in Georgia, which nobody likes here because it doesn't remind much of good. Do you think there is a real danger, immediate danger of something more to happen?
No, I don't. I mean, that claim that Moscow or earlier St. Petersburg has a right and a responsibility to protect the rights of ethnic Russians. That goes back to the 19th century, right? And fueled the Balkan Wars. And it's something I remember Deputy Foreign Minister Grushko said at the Brussels Forum in 2015, March, just after the invasion of Ukraine, when the rest of the room was attacking Russia for its naked aggression. He stood up and said, but what about the rights of ethnic Russians in Latvia and Estonia? And everybody went crazy thinking that that was a threat, that Russia would then exercise that right and move beyond Ukraine into the Baltic states. And I think NATO put that idea back in the bottle with the way it responded at the Warsaw Summit and then thereafter when it implemented the promises it made at Warsaw, which means the deployment of all those 4,500 troops in the Baltic states and Poland, with the US also deploying a significantly larger amount of troops. Russia got its worst nightmare. It was afraid of NATO enlargement, afraid of military bases right on its border, and that's what it got for the way it behaved.
What would be, I know that's not a good question, what would be your advice to the Georgian government and to those young people still protesting outside the parliament?
I think the advice to the Georgian government would be that these people are not provocateurs. This is what Georgians feel. These are the people you were elected to represent. If you're not in line with this overwhelming sentiment in Georgia, then you're representing some minority and you better be careful. You better be careful and make sure that democracy is really working in Georgia. And then I would just say, repeating what I said before, I do think the current, President Zurabishvili is trying to thread the needle. She gets a lot of criticism. I've been critical before of her, but I think she's on the right path. I think the path is Georgians and Georgia keep doing everything they can to be as close to NATO as possible, operationally, continuing to contribute their troops to NATO operations, coalition operations, coming up to all NATO standards, as Georgia has, maximizing interoperability, making clear also politically and publicly what Georgia's aspiration is, and never stop asking for membership, even if the head of state has to try to be above it all and maintain some sort of working relationship with Moscow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.